Hello, Pride. I am the last Leo, welcoming you back or welcoming you for the first time. This channel is all about Black Indigenous spirituality, surviving modernity and late stage capitalism, radical self-sustainability, and body-mind alignment. Now let's get into it. Today's video is not one that I'm particularly enthused about or happy to make, but I don't see any more out there, which means that I gotta do it. Over the summer, there was someone who reached out to me via DM asking me how much I charge for money spells. And I don't do things that way. Some practitioners might, but I don't. So I politely informed her that my process was more, we contact your ancestors and see where you're at and where you need to go before doing any workings. What this ended up being was her telling me about being scammed by Black spiritual practitioners and losing her life savings, about $14,000 total. This was really heartbreaking for me to hear, especially because I know what it's like to be led astray by purported spiritual practitioners. I never lost money, but I have been taken down the wrong path and manipulated and exploited before. So I was really gracious to this person in my DMs. I understood where they were coming from and I offered free advice and help. Ultimately, this person decided that she wanted to just go back to Christianity because she felt that Black Indigenous spiritual systems were full of scammers. I can confirm that there are indeed people who purport to practice these religions, to be initiated in these systems, who are really just looking for others who are vulnerable, who are looking for something to alleviate things that are going on internally, and who are particularly ripe for exploitation. As much as that is true, it's also very true that these types of scammers, people wanting to exploit other people, exist in all religions. It's because in the capitalist system, salvation becomes a commodity. And as long as it can be commodified, there's gonna be people who are out there trying to sell it. There are scammers all up and through the Christian religion. Jim Bakker, who's the husband of Tammy Faye Bakker, they were televangelists back in the day. There's a movie coming out about them and their scams. There's an HBO special about this woman named Gwen Shamblin, who had a church that was founded on the idea of God wants you to lose weight. And she was definitely a scammer. I personally feel that Joel Osteen is a scammer. I'm from Houston. I passed by that big ass Lakewood church so many times. He did not open up the church for people to seek refuge in during Hurricane Harvey, and he received a lot of pushback for that. And since he has changed his tune, he gives me ultimate scammer vibes. It's too much money in that church and too much money is going to him. Amongst Black communities, the figure of the preacher man started as a scammer, or at least someone who had to use scamming in order to climb mostly his way up in the world. People want salvation so badly. There's such a high, in the capitalist term, there's a high demand for it. And so there's a whole mass of people waiting to fulfill that demand and to get rich off of it. In terms of hoodoo and conjure, especially the way it exists in the digital sphere, there's this gray area that exists because conjure is formulated to fight capitalism, yet it is often sold through these social media platforms. There's instances of scammer pages that go into people's DMs, asking them to buy readings. No real practitioner is ever going to do that. If someone is coming into your DMs about religious stuff, run away and block. But even amongst the so-called legitimate spiritual practitioners, there's very much this energy of clout chasing and power struggles amongst them. The things that I've seen and that I know of it might put people off entirely, but I'm staying true, so anyone that's on this journey should as well. I promise you it's worth it. But what you do need to look out for is folks who will use fear and intimidation to manipulate you into doing something, into giving you their power, into doubting your own power, into giving them money, etc., etc. People will threaten retaliation against their clients and each other to maintain this facade that they're this all-powerful person and that their ancestors are going to go after anyone who dares to cross them, and that they're the HNIC, basically. I want to be very clear. Conjurers, two heads, hoodoo saints have always gotten paid for doing work for others and for teaching others. But when the desire for that money or the desire for power supersedes doing the liberation work, then it's not conjure anymore. It's not hoodoo anymore. It's just another cog of capitalism. And the truth that a lot of these so-called legitimate practitioners don't want you to know is that anything you want to do in hoodoo, you can do yourself. You can do for yourself. You are not required to pay another person in order to practice. Really, in my opinion, you should only be paying to learn and to get the feel of certain workings before you start doing work on your own. For me personally, doing work on your own is the ultimate goal because you can personalize it to you. You can put your specific intention behind it, and you just have that much more of an advantage of getting things to manifest. Confused by what I mean by this? Of course you are. There's all these things going on online about how you have to be initiated in this and initiated in that and all this stuff. So to offer a bit more explanation, I'm going to take a slight detour into some religious history. So in the 16th century, there was a massive political uprising that was beginning to build against the Catholic Church. People like this guy, Martin Luther, and others before and after him had really big problems with the way the Catholic Church was doing things. Most of you are probably familiar, but for those who are not and who care to be familiar, the Catholic Church is very much a bureaucracy, a hierarchy. There's levels of power that exist within the Catholic Church. And the idea is that you have to go through these levels of power if you want to get to God, basically. Martin Luther and his folks, they were not with it. They did not like the idea that people could buy their way into heaven through the Catholic Church, and they didn't like the idea that there was this group of people who were in charge of the salvation of many, many other millions. This led to the Protestant Reformation. This led to the creation of things like the Gutenberg Bible. Bibles began to be printed that were in languages that people could read instead of Latin, which by that time, if you could read, you probably couldn't read Latin unless you were trained in the palaces and in the big churches of Europe. Now, was Martin Luther and the other Protestant reformers, were they the first ones to kind of come up with this idea of individuals being in charge of their own spiritual destiny? No. In fact, very rarely are any of these white folks or these European folks the first to think of anything or to come up with anything. However, they're one of the most documented examples, so that's what we're going to use. As you may have picked up over the course of all the videos that I've done, hoodoo is not the same as these other Afro-diasporic traditions such as Lukumi, Orisha-based traditions, even Vodou, even though there's a lot of influence that permeates hoodoo. And people really look down on the practice of hoodoo and conjure, one, because it's American, or it's indigenous to the land we now know as the United States, and two, because this sort of infrastructure that exists in these other traditions doesn't really exist here. But for me, I actually think that it's a very good thing, a beneficial thing for hoodoo practitioners that all that doesn't really exist here, because it allows for you as an individual and your ancestral body to chart the way in your spiritual journey. Most importantly, when that infrastructure is so set, it becomes easier for you to get scammed. It becomes easier for you to get manipulated because you can go so long without understanding what's happening due to the fact that there's a whole body of people who say that this is the way that it's supposed to be and it's the only way it can be. When there's a religious culture that's infused with power in that way, it's hard to recognize when abuses and exploitation take place. Trust me, I know. And so if you take anything from this video, I just want you to understand that you are in charge of your spiritual journey. You are in charge of building that relationship with your ancestors, and they will show you the way that you need to go. You don't need to look towards these other people on earth for all of that. There's other ways of getting that. Just because you're not a chef doesn't mean you can't cook. And just because you can cook doesn't mean you don't occasionally need a chef if just to teach you something. It's okay to support the spiritual practitioners you know because they have the experience and you need that experience to help guide you. But giving all your money over, giving all your power over to these other people that are walking around on earth just like you and I, it's not the move. Tell me what you think in the comments. Let me know if you've had any experiences with these types of scam artists, how you dealt with it. Community conversation is one of the ways we can build a new way of thinking about this and remove the power or take the power back from these people who are trying to scam us and exploit us. Thank you so much for checking this video out, and I'll see you next week.